Okay guys, welcome back, and now we're just going to jump right in and we'll kick off the beginning sections of the course material. And as you can see here, I am logged in into Putty where we left off last time, and I'm just go ahead and run through some basic stuff and then talk about the bash main shell environments that control your access to the shell. So in this case, I'm just going to clear the screen, and the first thing that controls the bash environment is anytime you log in, there's a series of scripts that gets run that sets your environment variables, and this is pretty common in most Linux distributions, in fact all Linux distributions, because it takes its origins from the POSIX architecture of Unix. So having said that, you can see that if I go into the directory, if I can type today, alright, so if I do an ls and I don't worry about the search, I'll explain most of it later, and I do something about profile. Here you can see I have two files. I have the profile, there's a file, and then I have the profile.d file, and the first one here is a file. So basically, if we try to see the contents of the etc profile file, here you can see a whole lot of output here in the script. And one thing that's of interest that you should know about this is it tries to run one script that controls the user's home settings and environment. So unlike Windows where you have graphical user interfaces and all, here in Linux or in the Unix environment you have some scripts that gets run and sets your aliases and environment. So the bash, the etc/profile file, this is a general template for your startup programs. So you can see here the system-wide environment and startup programs. So this gets run anytime you start, and this basically calls another script that we will look at. But before we look at the script, the bash, the etc profile file, it's a general template that gets copied to every user's path or home directory anytime you create a new user. So now we have a profile file configuration that is specific to every user, and that is stored within the if I can just run a cat, so that is stored within the tilde. So if I run the tilde, explain what the tilde does. So the home directory, and then there's a bash profile file, and here you can see that after running this is where I run the command. You can see here that this is specific to me, the current user, and if you run the who am I command, it's going to tell you that you are the root user. So I'm logged in as a root user, and here you can see that this is my bash_profile file, and this basically just calls the .bashrc file. So just that said, here you can set some home or path, you can see here, and then here you export the path so that it becomes globally available. So we'll talk about global variables now. And here you can see where we unset the username. So the username here, we unset it. The reason why I unset that for the root user is because the root user is a super user, so we don't want to compromise that for security. So that is that. And let me just clear the script and go to the next file here. If I run a cat on the home directory of bashrc, here you can see this is where the user specific alias and functions have been set. So in this case, for instance, if you create an alias to a command and you want it to be persistent across reboots, then you put it in the .bashrc file. But if you want to set paths, environment paths, let's say you install an application and you want the paths to be available in the shell, then you set it in the .bash_profile file. So now that you understand that, for instance, here later we'll come back and add one or two aliases just to show you how it's done. Then the last one I want us to look at in this series of .bash or .files is the .bash_logout file. So this basically just does the bash logout, does what you expect. This is run anytime you log out, and what this means is anytime you log out, it goes ahead and clears the screen before the shell exits or leaves the screen. Alright, so having said that, we've basically looked at the etc profile file, we've looked at the .bash profile, .bashrc, and the .bash logout file. Alright, so if you notice, you saw me putting the tilde, that's the tilde sign, and this means the home directory. So I'll get to that in a minute, but before we do that, you saw me also use commands like cat and etc, ls, cd, and all. Those are actually bash built-in commands. So what that means is reserved words, and means you don't create a function on alias that uses the same name. So now that we've said that, now let's look at an example here. The ls command does exactly what you expect. This is short for list, and of course you can pass it options just like every Linux command. So if I do the ls-l, this gives me the format in a long format. This way I can see all the permissions set, who owns the file and the group that the user belongs to, and the file size and the date and timestamp of the file. Alright, so that's how you run, that's how you use the ls command. You can use a lot, of course. If you want, I can just list the ls-d option here, and this basically gives you the top level directory at list, of course. So here that we can see, you can do the ls-a command, and this will give you the same command, but this shows you all the hidden files. So anytime you have a dot, these are actually hidden files. And if I run the ls-a and the root directory, here you can see I have the .bash logout, .bashrc, .bash_profile, the C shell rc and all. So for instance, if I run it without the a command, you can see that I only have 3 files. While in its entirety I have a lot of hidden files, and then I have hidden directories as well. Alright, so now that you know that and all, so let's go over through some bash built-ins. I've showed you ls. cd basically changes directory from one path to the other. So let's say I want to change directory to the root directory or the home directory, then I just type cd and specify the path. So here I'm using the first dash here because I am actually going through what's called an absolute path. Okay, so cp basically copies a command. So in this case, for instance, if I go ahead and I say let me just quickly create a file. So let me touch file1.txt and then file2.txt. Alright, so I've created 2 files now, and you can see that. So what if I copy the file to a new file name? So I say file1.txt and I want to copy it to file1 or file3. So here you can see if I do an ls, you can see I now have a new file using the copy command. I just made a copy of file 1 and I call the file 3. So that's the copy command. Of course you can use the mv, you can move the file from one path to the other, or another common usage or function for the mv command is to rename file. So let's say I want to rename file 3 to, let's say just file.txt. So I can do that by just typing the mv command. So it takes this and it destroys the old file and recreate a new one. So here I can see I have file, and then of course I have the other files. Alright, so now the other thing that is also important here is the export command. Now the export command is used to set global variables. Let's say you want to modify the values of a global variable, then you use the export command. So but before I use the export command, let's use one other command that will show us all the global variables in the system, and this command is the set command. So anytime you type the set without any option, it goes ahead and lists all the global variables in your system, and you can see they're all in caps. This is just a naming convention that is useful if you're trying to create what's called a global variable. So here the things that are of interest in this case, you can see the shell we're using the bash shell. Here you can see all the versions, and all this is an array, so you can see the array contains all the versions and numbers. You can see things like the terminal colors, you can see things like the history size, the history file size, and of course the history file. You can see this stores the file in a bash_history file. You can see this is the host name, so you can always modify the host name. You can see, for instance, things like the list command. Okay, so you can see some colors there. This is a little bit complex, but just to show you, you can see here we have the old present working directory, so we're actually in etc before we change to home directory. And of course you have a lot of options here. Of course you have the user, which is root, and the user ID, which is 0. So now that you can see that what the global variable does, so let's say for instance you want to modify the, basically you just want to say, okay, I want to modify the history size or the history file size. So let me just make a copy of it. So I'm just go ahead and clear this and export the new file name, and I'm going to make it equal to a new file size. So here there we had 1000 is 10,000. So let's say I'll just make it, okay, so 2000. Alright, so now having done that, if I run the set command again and I go to the history file size, here you can see that I've changed it to 2000 from the previous 1000. So that's how you change global variables, and that's when you use the export command. Alright, so that's majority of the bash built-ins. Go ahead and look at the material. There you find more materials on the bash built-ins command, and you can familiarize yourself with them. So now let's look at the some expansion. I said I'll come back to the tilde expansion technique. So that said, you can notice the tilde, which you can find on your keyboard, which is just the key before the number 1 at the top of your keyboard. The tilde sign represents the home directory of any user that is logged in. So if I, for instance, run a cd on the home directory, here you can see that the path has changed to the tilde sign, and this tells me right now that I am in the home directory of the user root. So if I do an ls, you can see all the files in the home directory of the user root. Okay, and this is basically just a shortcut for the global variable, the home variable. So if I run an echo on the global variable home, here you can see that the home directory for the user is root. So anytime I do a cd to the tilde sign, basically does a cd into the home directory, which is root. So I can easily just do this, and here you can see this gives me the same thing. You can see the tilde sign because I'm logged in as the user root, and this is the home directory of the root user. Or I can just do a cd into the home variable, and basically the same thing. So these are just shortcuts, and this is usually shorter and easier to work with than the previous ones. Alright, so that's tilde expansion. The next thing is the parameter expansion. So let's say we create a variable, right? If you notice, you saw me using the $ home. Why not just use home? Well, this is because home is a global variable, and the $ here just tells me that I've already created the variable somewhere else, and now all I need to do is just access the variable. So you access a variable or a parameter expansion in bash using the $. So for instance, let me run the set, and this time around, instead of showing you all the output, let me just look for a variable called home. Alright, so you can see here that I have one of the variables that was created was the home, which points to the root of the user. Ignore the last line, just because I did a whole search. And what is interesting about bash is you don't see spaces after the equal sign. This is very important, because as you evolve and you start writing your scripts and you start making your script useful, you will notice that you get a lot of mistakes and errors if you have a space between your equal signs. This is how bash is designed to run, and it's not as full-fledged as other programming languages that allow you to put spaces and then it passes it. Alright, so now that I've seen the $, let's quickly create our own variable. Now this is not going to be a global variable. The reason is because it's only present in just this shell. By the time we close this session and open a new session, then we lose the settings. So for instance, let me just create a variable. Let me just call it the parameter, right? This is tall, so let me just call it param. Okay, and I'm going to make it equal to 5. Let's just create a variable called param, and let's assign to it the number 5. So now if I just want to access my param variable, if I do this is not going to work, because remember, this is the name and this is where we set the variable. And if I come here and I put the $ this time around and I put enter, now you notice that it's going to give me the value of the 5. And this is useful because this is how you can put it in your shell script to make reference to you can just create one single variable and make it available through or across. Now another way of showing your variable, especially when we start working with arrays later on, is that this might not really work in terms for arrays like that. This will only work with basic variables, and now when you're dealing with arrays, then you have to use the full parameter expansion format or syntax. So the way you do that is I could easily just use the same echo, but this time around I'll surround it in braces, and then I'll put the name of the parameter like this. So if I press enter, you notice I have the same output, but this time around this is called the parameter expansion or the variable expansion format. Alright, so I hope this has been very informative. I hope you've understood the basic concept here. What we quickly covered was the etc profile file, the .bash profile, the .bashrc, and the bash logout file. We also looked at some basic bash built-ins like the ls, cd, cp, as for copy, mv, and export. Then we had to head and look at the tilde, and we just rounding up the parameter expansion and variable expansion. So I'm actually deciding to cut the videos into small chunks. This way it makes it very easy for you to read, and then that way it doesn't get too long and then you get bored. Alright, so now obviously if you have any questions, you can put it on the comment section of the post. If you're wondering where the post where we're going to have all the short scripts for the post is, let me quickly bring up on the screen, just give me a moment here. Let me bring up on the screen the short URL that is going to be used for the course, and this is actually just a link that goes to my blog and nothing else. So let me bring it to view here. So you can see here, this is the URL, and anytime you want to go to this direct post, this is where I'm going to be posting links to the course materials, links to short videos, or if I feel you need to make reference to a site online or some scripts that I've created. So having said that, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.